guys, we're going to start our drawing. We did our Zoom drawing class and we had a lot of technical difficulties today. So sorry about that. Thanks for being so patient. But I'm going to go ahead and redraw a couple of these so you can watch it at home and practice. So we're going to draw our chameleon from a color of his own first. And I'm going to show you how I did some fun painting techniques I did on there. You can see he's got some fun lizard skin. And I did that with salt. So you're going to need a tiny bit of salt, paintbrush, pencil, a Sharpie is what I'm using, but you can use a black crayon. That will resist watercolor also, or even a ballpoint pen. And watercolor markers or watercolors. If you use markers, you can just use a wet paintbrush to blend it. So here is how we're going to draw our chameleon. Hopefully you'll be able to see this okay. I like to start out with my chameleon and kind of decide how big I want him on my page. So I kind of was like, yeah, I want him about that big. So I kind of was like, that's going to be the top of him and that's going to be the bottom of him. And these pencil lines are pretty light. I like to make them light at first and then I go over it with a Sharpie or I make them darker. But he's kind of up to here. And then his head, as you can see, it's almost like a triangle. So you go up, chameleons have like this head that comes up and down like that and then around. So you can see that's kind of a rough sketch of what his head looks like. And then I'll just continue it to his body. And then this guy's tail curls up. And this is kind of tricky. A couple of the kids were having a hard time with it. I just kind of continue his upper half, so his back, and then I make it into the swirl that's going to go up. So go and just kind of make a swirl. I kind of got close to the edge of the paper here, so I'm going to run out of room if I'm not careful for the top of his tail. And then you take his belly, his underside, and you come up and you're going to swirl over the top. And then you're going to connect the two squirrels like that, two swirls. And you can see how they connect. Okay? Now, one thing I didn't do on the class online, which I did in my first drawing, is since I pencil drew these, the front leg, I was able to erase the line after I drew it. And the back leg, I left the line there so you can tell it's behind. So I'm going to just kind of behind his head, draw his first leg, and I'm going to just give him 3 toes. And then the back leg is going to be a little smaller than the front leg. I'm trying to draw this so I don't block the camera. This leg is bigger because it's in front. And then this back leg again is kind of going to be a little smaller because it's in the back. Okay, so I'm going to go over that with my Sharpie now, and so you can see it better, and then I'll erase all my pencil lines that show. So here we go. Do, 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 do. Just get this nice, and the more you practice doing the curly tail, the easier it gets to leave yourself a little more room than I did at the top of the page for his tail. And then we'll just color in his feet, draw in his feet. And I drew in that line after I told you to leave that. Should have erased it so I remembered, but it's okay. No big deal. Okay, now that I have him all penciled and drawn in, I'm going to add his eyeball, and I like to give him lots of big eye, and then They have kind of a circle there. And then I kind of like to leave a little bit of a catch light like we did last week. When we drew Sharky, we leave a little white spot in the black of the eye like the light is reflecting. And it makes him look a little more alive when you leave a little catch light in the eyeballs. And if you want to make it a girl chameleon, you could add eyelashes. And then in the book, his mouth just goes straight. But I kind of like to give him a little bit of a smile. So it's a little bit bent like that. Okay. So that's how I draw my chameleon. Now I'm going to take my eraser and erase any pencil lines that I don't want to show, because this marker is permanent. It's not going to matter if I erase right over it. If you can't use a permanent marker, then just use a black crayon and you can erase but crayons might smear, so you need to be a little more careful when you're erasing your pencil lines than I was. Okay. All right. Now that we've drawn that simplified chameleon, I'm going to show you, actually the other one's not harder, it's just got a little more details to it. We're going to now draw this guy. You can tell he looks like he's fancier, but really we just painted him with more colors in a different way. So when we do the painting, this is going to be what I'll teach you, the two different techniques for painting. So we're going to draw that guy now. So I'm going to take my paper and turn it this way this time and use my pencil. And I know I want to leave a lot of room for the tail. I got to think about that. So I'm going to leave most of the paper for the tail. So what I like to do is draw maybe about, this is kind of a stick that the chameleon's going to be sitting on. And I kind of want a little higher than I want to, so I'll probably draw him on the bottom line and ignore that one. So I'm just kind of giving myself an area for him. So his head is actually, like we talked about in the first one, kind of like a big triangle. And make it look how you want it. Erase stuff. Okay, so I've got his head kind of like a triangle there. And then I'm going to kind of give him, I've got a little helper here. This little kitty likes to jump up on my lap and come join me when I'm doing artwork. This is Periwinkle. Say hi, Periwinkle. Okay, now she's got to go. She might jump back up here, we'll see. Okay, so for his back, I want to kind of give him a little bit of a hump back. And I'm going to come just to the edge because I know I need to leave room for the tail. And then his belly kind of connects like this. Now, instead of going up with the tail like we did in the first one, this time his tail is curling down. So I'm going to bring the bottom of his tail down. And goodness, you can do as many swirls as you want, but that looks good to me. And then I'm going to bring his belly and connect the tail. And at the end of the swirl, I connect it like that. Okay. Now, one thing I did with this guy is I need to draw the stick that he's sitting on now. And that kind of helps me know where his legs are going to go. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to pencil in his legs this time. His legs kind of come over and they have a little bend that goes back. Like his elbow goes backwards, not forward like ours. And then his feet are wrapping around. And then this leg comes from back here and bends back. And then his toes hold on like that. And then from behind, his legs just come to the stick, and maybe we'll have a toe poking up like he's holding on over here. He's holding on just a toe around, he's holding around the stick. So There's his legs. But now I can erase these pencil lines on the front leg so he doesn't have a line going through his leg. I forgot to do that on our first chameleon. So now you can see his legs. Okay, so I'm going to go over everything we just did with the Sharpie now and erase all my pencil lines. Swirl around. It's okay if I don't match up to all my lines because I'm going to erase anything I don't cover. Skip the legs so I don't draw through the legs again. Okay, and then I'm going to draw his legs and his feet. I'm trying to hold my hand so you can still see what I'm doing without me blocking the camera. I like that better. Here's this little back leg wrapped around the stick. And then I'm going to need to draw the stick. Okay. And then do his eyeball. Let's give him a nice big eyeball. And the black part, we're going to leave a little white dot in his eyeball to catch light so he looks alive. And then color in the eyeball with black. You can paint this in if you want to use black paint, but I'm already using a black marker, so I'll just draw it in. And then we'll give him a smile. Now this guy, we kind of did fun sections between that we colored him. So just from behind his head, start, and I kind of just did wacky sections. I didn't do it just a straight line, but you can just do straight lines if you want to. Sorry, I didn't want to do straight lines, so I didn't. Get to hear me swallow my water. Okay, and just go all along his body and his tail and make sections. Just like that. Sorry, I'm having a cough attack. Never do this perfectly, huh? One other thing I did for this guy is I gave him like a stick coming up here, and I just drew simple, basic leaves. Draw leaves anywhere you want. You do not have to do anything like I did, but I just kind of liked to add a little bit of detail by adding leaves and keeping them really simple, because the most important thing is to see the chameleon. And chameleons eat leaves, so he needs some food. All right, so now that I have it all drawn in Sharpie, I'm going to go along and erase anything that I don't want to show. I have lots of pencil lines that I need to erase on mine this time. Okay. So now you have chameleon with his tail up and his chameleon with his tail down. And you know, on the first chameleon, you can make him more fancy by adding sections like we did on this one if you want. But don't do it yet. I want to show you some painting techniques I did. So on this one, we're gonna paint him first. And I noticed that when I looked at Leo Leonni's picture of the chameleon, to me, it looked like he did what is called a wet on wet paint. So when you paint with wet paint on wet paper, then your paints blend like this. They run or blend. So I'm going to show you how to get that effect with your paint. So I have my little paint set here, and I'm going to go and add water to all of them. Clean water so they start getting paint, because it's all dry, right? And I put a little water in each one, clean water. I use these old rags to wipe my paintbrushes on so I don't have to use a bunch of paper towel, and then when it gets gross I throw it in the washer and wash it, and they never lose their stains, but they're definitely clean. All right, so this is the cool trick with the wet on wet. So I'm going to take some clean water, and anywhere I want the paint to run and mix, I'm going to get it wet. If I don't want the paint to go there, I can't get it wet. So I'm just going to get the chameleon wet on the inside of the body. I'm just going to do this middle section for now, right there, okay? And you can't really see the water in the camera, but you'll see it when I start painting it. So I'm going to start with red, like Leo Leonni did. And if I just start painting with red, anywhere the water is, it kind of runs and drips. And then I'm not even going to do it in any kind of order. I'm going to maybe add some orange and just let it kind of run. So if I'm going to add some more water over here, I want to be careful not to get water on the eyeball, or it's going to run into the eyeball. So I'm just going to add water to the rest of my little chameleon here. If I add it to too many places, it kind of dries before I can get my paint on it sometimes. One thing to keep in mind, if you put primary colors next to each other, you're going to make, if I put red and blue together, I'm going to probably make purple, but if you put orange and green together, you're going to make a color we call brown, and that's not the most flattering color. So if you put primary colors together, it'll make another color. If you put secondary colors together, it's going to make brown in a lot of cases. So I'm just going to kind of add color here and there. Let's see, we'll use a little purple. I gotta be careful because the purple and green are gonna make brown, or the purple and orange. But look at that, fun stuff. If you want more color, add more. Okay, now I'm gonna get this part of my chameleon wet. I'm being really careful not to get my water outside of the lines, or the paint will go outside the lines too. And then I'll add some paint. You can even kind of hold your brush like that and it'll run. But if you tip it too far, it'll run outside. But usually it'll stay on the chameleon because there's no water off of him. But you can let it go. I'll add some red here. I need to get the rest of his tail wet. And okay, I went outside the line a little bit. I'm sure we're going to get some interesting stuff happening, but try and be a little more careful as I paint him. Let's do a little blue on his tail, maybe a little green, maybe go in a rainbow pattern. The rainbow pattern, you're never going to mix primaries, secondaries, and secondaries together because green, blue, purple, so this we need a little yellow. could add some orange, and when those blend together, they work. And then maybe a little more red. So his tail is kind of rainbowy. I think I want a little more color up here. The first place I did paint is already dry, so I'm going to add just a tiny bit of water to it because I'm going to teach you this cool salt trick. I didn't like that I added orange up there. Nope, not at all. I'm going to keep the head blue and green. Okay, one thing when you work with watercolor too, if you play too much, you'll make your paper start to come apart. So you got to be careful. So I got to stop. So here's the cool trick with salt. And I'll show you close up. You're just going to want a tiny pinch of it. And where the paint is wet, you can drip it on there and it will suck up the paint in just those spots. And you leave it on until it's 100% completely dry, and then you can brush off the salt. But if you brush it off before, you'll smear your painting. But wherever the salt is, as it dries, it just kind of sucks a little paint into a spot, and you'll get a lizard texture on it, like I got on my first chameleon. You can see everywhere that I'd put salt. That's what it did on this one. If you put too much salt, it kind of just takes over. So you got to be really careful just to add it in little bits. And I have kind of a couple big puddles of paint. There might be too much paint in those puddles for the salt to work, but it's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do this guy's feet. Add a little water to the feet so that they blend. Do the wet on wet effect like we've been doing. And I'm going to let the paint blend down. Kind of go with what colors are above it. That helps. And a little red here. Orange, add a little bit of yellow to that one, and we'll do blue and green on this one. Okay, there's our chameleon. And when I came back in later, and I probably could have done that first, but I came in later with our chameleon, my first chameleon, and I added some leaves and I painted them, but I didn't add salt to them. So this is the texture of the salt on my first chameleon. Okay, and maybe I'll add a tiny bit of salt to his feet so they have some texture too. Now I just need to let this dry flat so it doesn't move around too much, because the more you move it, it's gonna smear. Okay, so I'm gonna let that dry over here on a flat spot. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to paint our second chameleon, which we are going to do this one differently. We're going to do him dry. I'm going to teach you how to paint this one dry so he doesn't blend together so much. All of his colors are separate. If you want the colors to blend and mix together, then you know what to do. You wet the paper first. But for him, I did not want to wet the paper first. I just wanted his colors to stay separate. So I didn't wet the paper. This is called a wet on dry. It's called a dry. You have a wet brush, but you have dry paper. There's actually another way to watercolor paint called dry brush, where your brush, you put paint on it, but you don't have your brush wet, and it makes the paint just kind of go on really chunky a little bit. Okay, for this guy, if I want to have the texture of the lizard, I need to do a section and then just put a little salt on it, because if I wait till I finish the lizard, then any sections that are dry won't work. Like this one I did, and I don't put salt on at the end, and only this guy got texture because he was the only wet spot. There's a little bit of texture on some of it, but most of it was dry. So you have to add the salt when he's wet. So I'm just gonna go and paint our little chameleon in sections on this one without a wet paper. I'll do his foot, and then each section I finish, I'll add a tiny pinch of salt, just a little bit, and we'll see how it turns out. I'm gonna actually kind of go in, you don't have to go in rainbow order. I mean, you can mix it up. On this one, I didn't totally go in rainbow order. I'm just gonna do it this time for fun. I'm gonna paint it in rainbow. Okay, finish that section and put a little thing here. One fun thing I did when I painted the stick is I just put brown paint on the top of the stick and maybe just on half of the stick on that one. And I usually wait till I'm done with the chameleon, but I want to do it now so I can show you. And then I just kind of a little wet brush with no paint and just kind of get the rest of the stick wet and let the brown blend down a little bit. So it looks like it's kind of two colors. And I'll do the same thing up here, just a wet brush and let that brown blend. So wet the paper, or you could wet the stick before, like the wet on wet. And then the leaves are obviously, I like them green, but you know what? You can make purple leaves if you want. You can do any color leaves. And once I painted the green and they were wet with green paint and they were still wet, I took a little bit of blue and I just blended some blue on them to make them look fun texture. Or you could even paint half of the paint leaf blue and the other half of the leaf green. That's kind of a fun look too. However you want to do it. All right, I'm going to just paint a couple more sections here in my lizard. And the really important thing to do though is to let your lizard dry 100% before you touch it again. Or else you'll mess up the salt, the effect. And sometimes it takes almost all day for it to dry 100% with that salt because it adds a lot of texture to it, and it might take a little longer to dry, especially where the salt is, because it pulls up the paint in that little area, which you're going to notice as you do this, that it sucks the paint to the salt. And so when you're painting, you're going to notice, you'll see it up close, that it kind of sucks. I'm going to add a little salt to each section as I go. As you can see, I've got some there. We'll see what he ends up looking like. Okay, I'm going to probably stop my video here, and maybe I'll add a picture at the end with what my final result is when I finish. But for the most part, that's it. Good job, you guys. Keep practicing and leave a comment and share how you did and how it turned out. You can. Hey guys, I just wanted to show you a video of my finished chameleons now that they're dry. And the salt is still on there. Now that they're dry, I can kind of scratch it off. Sometimes it looks cool to keep it on if you want to, but I love all these cool little texture things that I got from the salt. Where'd it go? There you are. Anyway, turned out really cool. And this guy haven't rubbed off any of the salt, but it turned out pretty cool. Hope you guys had fun.